What's up world? It's Willy What If, here with another episode of What If Deku Gave Up on Being a Hero. I'm glad so many of you enjoyed the last video, and all your feedback is being taken into consideration. Any more suggestions please let me know in the comment section below. And remember you can ask for shows besides My Hero. Here's fair warning that there's a heavy scene of contemplating suicide in this chapter. Part 2. Tap, tap, tap. That was all he heard as his hands punched in the keys across the board to his computer. His back hunched over the screen, his eyes scanning the data like an insect in an attempt to make the time fly by faster. There were other people around him, of course. They weren't bad people, and in the years he spent at the company he'd actually grown somewhat close to them. But he simply loathed the association his brain had set up between his coworkers and so much constrained, managed time. He wanted to be free, to step out if only for a minute, but he knew he couldn't. Well, he could, but that would mean everyone else would have to work harder and there were things to get done and deadlines to meet. He didn't hate the job. In fact, he was quite good at it and the tasks were bearable enough, yet there was nothing in it to be passionate about. It was just numbers and statements and due dates and the occasional lawsuit he had to file. It was just enough to get by on, and he supposed that was fine. But the crazy girl said it best: you're going to die one day and then you'll never get another chance at living again. He didn't want this to be what defined him as a person. Izuku wanted to have some other part of his life be worth suffering for if he had to support himself with this mindless bullshit which chipped away at his youth. Momentarily he smiled in relief. He was a sidekick now. He made the dangerous first step towards achieving some form of his childhood dream, and not to mention, offered him a second stream of income, however meager a government paycheck can be compared to those of the private sector. With the final sheet of the hour done and a few minutes left until his lunch break, Izuku pondered something he never considered since middle school: what his hero name would be. Briefly he consulted some of the ones he created in his boyhood, only to cringe at the examples of Mightyman, All Might Jr. and so on. There were literally an endless amount of names he could make, which once were set upon that dotted line for his sidekick license. It would be set in stone for over a decade if the articles and regulations he read up on were correct. Maybe if he had a quirk it'd be easier for him, seeing how most people base literally their entire identity on their powers. He scowled a bit at the truth. Everyone else had abilities which made them utterly unique, with no other person in the world being like them, while he was left with a weakness that, thankfully, he could hide under his skin that marked him as a pariah in comparison. Why couldn't he be born with a telepathic fire quirk like his genetics suggested? His entire life probably would have been completely different then. Maybe he'd even be the #1 hero instead of that asshole who beat the shit out of him. Why was he damned as weak from the moment he was born? Why do people like Elemental, Lemillion and Kachan get to have such amazing lives while he was left in the dirt, twiddling his life away in this company? It wasn't fucking fair, but he couldn't change it, not in the way he wanted. He couldn't just wish with all his might for a quirk and get it. He was stuck the way he was as a quirkless, basic human being instead of those titans with the literal powers of gods which soared above the ants like him. His hands balled tightly into fists right as the lunch bell rung, so he exhaled, dug the resentment down and smiled to hide the seething resentment he felt in front of his coworkers as he moved to the cafeteria, took his seat in the farmost table situated in the darkest corner of the room, and ate his pitiful meal of cup ramen. Nothing would change. He'd still be Deku, with a Deku's life and a Deku's trouble. He'd never get to stand on stage and give inspiring speeches to people in need, never save people from a burning building with a simple swing of his arm. All he'd ever be was a plain, normal man with a bullshit life, LARPing as a hero next to an E-lister who was barely noticeable. This was it, and there was nothing he could do about it. He felt his face go flush with anger, and for an instant he saw red. But again, like a good little Deku, he put the emotion down deep in his soul and continued eating. He wasn't powerful enough to have his rage mean anything, and even if he did reach out and murder his coworkers with the chopsticks in his hand, they weren't people deserving of such a fate even if they annoyed him. For a moment he shut his eyes and held his breath. He couldn't do anything to get what he wanted exactly as he wanted it, so why worry about it? Because it's fucking unfair that some motherfuckers get everything in life and I'm left with just smiling and taking it up the ass because I literally have no worth compared to them. He thought to himself, goddamn, I hate stoicism. Izuku muttered to no one as he counted down the few minutes left before he needed to return to work. All around him nobody noticed him since they were so busy with their own affairs or dealing, likely, with the exact worries he was before needing to return to the grind. It was fine this way, but it certainly wasn't better. The rest of the day was the same monotonous routine as what happened for years of him punching in the proper numbers and words for the next 3 hours until the bell dinged, excusing him for the day and concluding his shift, leaving all of 6 hours before he needed to sleep and do it all over again the next day. Izuku felt his teeth clench as he stood in the metro, hanging on to the overhead rail which threatened to bend in his grasp from the force his hand was exerting. Maybe you should take a swan dive off the roof and hope for a quirk in your next life. He twisted the ring in his palm, the strap going tanta as those words bounced around in head. Again a scowl found its way to his face with every ounce of fury directed out the window at nothing, with his teeth bared and lips curled like a wild animal, which only made him look more pathetic. "I tried that, you dickhead, but I couldn't go through with it, so why don't you shut the hell up and leave me alone for once?" And quat. He whispered to the world as the sound of the train destroyed the sound before anyone else could hear it. There came a laugh in his head, one that he knew was just his brain playing tricks on him, yet it sounded so real. "No, you're just a weak, stupid Deku who couldn't even jump off a bridge right because you're a coward who's too scared to take the plunge, you fucking failure." And quat. A loud bang echoed in the cabin of the train, causing him to flinch when the mag rails had an issue. It sounded so exactly like Kachan's quirk that he felt his heart leap in his throat. Damn it. God fucking damn it. Why the fuck is that stupid, arrogant fucker still in his head? He hadn't seen the fucker since middle school. Kasuchi likely doesn't even know he exists anymore, so why the fuck does he still have that power over him? There came a ding which indicated a stop was soon arriving, and he moved to the door, not caring if this was his destination or otherwise. Fine, if that stupid fucker won't let him be, if every attempt he makes to improve his life is paltry compared to what that cocksucker gets to live while he has to struggle and suffer just to get a fraction, a mere hint of the godlike life of Katsuki Bakugo, then fine, he'll do something right for once. Shoving his way through a crowd on the platform, Izuku moved north towards the highest object he could find, with his lifelong anger still blazing like a bonfire in his chest. Fuck him. Fuck his mother. Fuck his teachers. Fuck his coworkers. Fuck his boss. Fuck Sugarman. Fuck that crazy bitch, and fuck Kachan. He wasn't going to play their games anymore because he can't win, so why fucking play? A bridge was in sight, overlooking a river which cut between the cities that certainly looked high enough to get the job done. This was it. He'd do something right and at least have somebody know how angry he was. The note was still in his back pocket, so that wasn't an issue. As he stepped onto the beginning of the bridge, feeling the concrete under his shoes, Izuku marched towards the center where the point was highest. He gripped the red-painted handrails and inhaled. So he was really going to do it this time? No insane women to intervene? No heroes that would catch him? Just him and the hard water below? His fingers curled tightly around the railing, suddenly feeling very ill. Didn't he have things to do this week? The crazy girl? Himiko, they were supposed to do some training together, weren't they? And wasn't he supposed to meet his mother for dinner this Saturday? But none of that will matter if he simply stepped out in front, didn't it? No more pain, no more disappointment, no more watching those who looked down on him since birth have lives he could only dream of while struggling in vain to get 1% of their way of life. All it'd take is to step and let go, then he wouldn't have problems anymore. People would move on, the world wouldn't blink, and in the end he'd maybe be an obituary in the paper consisting of maybe 11 words, perhaps less. The crazy girl would find someone else to bother, Sugarman would hire another sidekick, his mother would get his life insurance money, and Kachan would get to laugh his ass off while every ounce of pain and disappointment inside him would vanish like his soul. And yet, the longer he stared down at the water, the more he realized that he didn't want to do this. He was angry, sure, but who wasn't bitter at the world with all its ugliness? He survived a major uprising by villains and had made something of himself, regardless of how mundane it was. However, he still understood that he'd likely be bitterly resentful and in pain for the rest of his natural-born life. Thus Izuku Midoriya made a choice by giving up his choice to the whims of the universe. A cosmic coin flip given to the fates. If there were no signs that he shouldn't jump, then he would. If there were, he wouldn't. Simple as that. So he closed his eyes and listened. Then, as if responding to his challenge, there came a ring from his pocket. Looking at the phone screen, he saw a number he didn't recognize and answered in the best, soullessly corporate way possible. Izuku Midoriya, how can I help you? And quat. A huffing breath answered back through the line that had it been at any other moment in his life, the quirkless man would be taken by surprise. Hi Midoriya, sorry to bother you at the moment, but I was wondering if you could come down to the agency. I need some help with some stuff and thought we'd get some training in. And quat. The voice was obviously Rikido Sato, who sounded like he just ran a mile and a half. Izuku closed his eyes once more, remaining silent for a solid minute before he turned away from the edge, faced the path back to the station and answered, "Okay, I'll be there in a couple minutes." And quat. A chuckle, deep and hearty, came through the phone that might have shattered his body if he was standing next to the man. "Great. I tell you bro, it was getting boring just working out here by myself. I don't need help with the paperwork just since you aren't officially hired until a couple days from now. But how about I show you how to lift, and tell you what, how about I bake you some cake for your time, And quat. There was an element of honest joy in the hero's response, one Izuku hadn't heard in a long time from anyone. Rikido sounded actually happy to have him around, to share in the act of growing as men. The quirkless sidekick didn't have it in him to smile, so he merely began to move towards the direction of the train station. That will be fine. And quat. Shutting the call off, Izuku pondered something as he boarded the train. How much would he have given up if he had jumped? How many things, grand and small, would he never experience if he went through with ending it? Yes, his life was pitiful and mundane and puny compared to Kachan or Elemental or those celebrity idols or a movie star or a pro athlete. And yes, he'd never get to shape the entire world or likely ever land in the history books like he wanted or have a quirk that'd make him like a god to the common man. But you know what? It was his life. It was his struggles and sorrows and pains and triumphs and joys and memories and nobody else's. It was uniquely his alone, and he only had one life which defined him, and he defined it. Sure, it sucked at times, but it was also worth living for the simple fact that everything changes eventually, meaning that it could get better and that there would be times that didn't suck. There were things in front of him right now that he couldn't even guess at, and his being would, by the very law of physics, be subject to change, which meant he could improve, that he could be better, that he could live a better life beyond what measly annoyances and tragedies beset him at the moment, even if they lasted since his birth. Because there was no certainty that they couldn't vanish tomorrow, that he couldn't be even just 1% better than the person he was today. Yes, he was quirkless. Yes, he was relatively poor. Yes, he was mostly alone, and certainly he was a wage slave. But he was alive, and that meant he could grow past those things which held him down. Looking at the clear blue sky, Izuku found himself remembering a phrase he had drilled into his head since childhood. The motto of Heights Alliance Academy. Plus ultra, go beyond. He would do just that because he deserved more than the hand he was dealt. He wasn't Deku, he only allowed that label to be put on him. It wasn't branded on him, and there was more to his being than merely being quirkless. Thus he'd go beyond the boundaries and hurdles put before him and reach a life he can be proud of, because there was nothing else for the malice of existence then to surpass it. He wouldn't accept the mundane horrors of his way, he would push past them to attain his dream. For he was the limit breaker, and he knew that he would win. Izuku Midoriya was not a physically strong man, he had always known that. He'd kept an average figure throughout his life and was always more partial to cardio and endurance training than anything. He even ran track in high school since his UA dreams were crushed back then. However, at the moment he'd wish that he had picked up a few dumbbells when he was younger, as he was currently trying not to have a 50-pound Barbie slammed on his windpipe. Come on man, you can do it, just 5 more. And quad. Rikido Sato stood over him like a sweat-stained giant as his hands followed the sway of the bar, making Izuku both grateful and pissed off at his encouraging words. Somehow the green-haired man managed to lift that heavy-ass weight the requested number of times, more due to him not wanting his neck crushed than any aspirations of achieving an all-might-like physicality. He sat up red-faced and huffing on the bench with sweat dripping off his sides. The two made eye contact and Rikido gave an affirming thumbs up while Izuku scowled. Why, you know, this sucks big time. And quad. A hand slapped against his back like a thunderclap as the sugar hero grinned mischievously at the person set to be his underling, his large pink lips making him appear cartoonist. You only say that because you're a beginner. It gets easier over time and you'll start to enjoy the pain. Biggest thing you have to remember is number 1. Consistency is key. You need to keep a regular schedule with your lifting so that you can continue to adapt your metabolism to the demands you set upon your body to maximize the results. Number 2. Pace yourself. Don't try to overdo it with the amount of resistance you put on your body. Don't rush straight into it either. You need to ease yourself into it bit by bit so that you can adjust without injuring yourself. And quad. He tapped a thumb to his chest. Believe me, one time I managed to snap a tendon in my arm because I didn't give my body time to rest throughout the week, and I barely did even a couple minutes of warm-up when I should have done 10. Thankfully the medical insurance I got managed to keep me from being permanently injured, and it shouldn't be a problem anymore until I get into my 50s, but learn from my mistakes so you don't wind up screwing yourself over. Your physical health is how you're going to be making your living now, so take extra care of your body. And quad. Izuku narrowed his gaze at the hero. Ironic coming from the guy who eats nothing but sweets. And quad. Rikido nodded affirmatively at the statement, handing him a bottle of water before moving to stretch his back. And you're correct in saying that. However, my quirk turns my glucose into raw muscle mass by converting it into protein, which is then made into new muscle cells, so I get to have my cake and eat it. And quad. Izuku raised an eyebrow while he took a swig of the water, careful not to ingest too much of the stuff as his lungs burned. So you're effectively immune to diabetes? And quad. The hero cracked his fingers as he found the last of his routine before wrapping boxing tape over his hands. Pretty much. Now why don't we? And quad. A finger began to tap almost compulsively against Izuku's chin as he began to stare out into nothing, his focus being drawn completely inward. So if your quirk is bound by the intake of sugar you ingest, then that would also have a direct correlation to your overall energy levels, seeing as how you'd have to withdraw from the complete amount of glucose in your system at the time, meaning that even if you'd consumed an insane amount of sugar, you would still be left feeling drained of energy, since the body can't handle such an intake or withdrawal of calories and glucose, meaning you would be left completely unconscious at worst if you used it for too long over a period of time or used the conversion process to an extreme in a momentary setting. Regardless, your quirk must have the side effect of leaving you drowsy if you use to any real degree, which would explain the obsession with eating, since you need to constantly refuel due to how your metabolism works in combination with your quirk. And quad. He continued to stare at the wall with his finger tapping against his chin until he shifted his eyes to the other person in the room, who looked utterly dumbfounded. Izuku flinched back a little, embarrassed at his old habit. Sorry, I tend to mutter at times. And quad. Rikido kept looking befuddled at the quirkless newbie, completely shell-shocked at what he heard. You figured out all that, just by hearing me explain that one thing? And quad. Izuku shrugged, somewhat confused by the reaction he was getting. He hoped this wouldn't be like every other time he let his habit out. Yeah, why? And quad. Rikido blinked stupidly for a moment. That's amazing. You sure you don't have a quirk? And quad. Now Izuku recoiled at the statement, utterly unsure of why he was asked that of all things, nearly falling off the bench in the process. No, I just have a fondness for quirks. I always have. It comes naturally to me. And quad. That did nothing to lessen the stronger man's expression. I read some of that notebook you left behind yesterday. Most of the observations in there were on par with most of the stuff I'd see on a quirk development file. Those guys have to get a master's degree before they do anything close to what you wrote down. Why the hell didn't you become a quirk specialist? And quad. Again Izuku shrugged, not really caring of what could have been. I never thought I could do it, or really anything. I was just a pebble on other people's paths to greatness, so why the hell should I bother? And quad. A finger was jabbed hard into his chest by the Goliath, making him wince in pain. There was a deep seriousness in those brown eyes that caught Izuku off guard. Whoever the hell told you that is wrong, dead wrong. You have a talent most people would die for, especially in this industry. Heck, most crime groups would kill to have somebody this good join them. Don't forget that, man. You have value. And quad. Not really sure how to take this compliment and encouragement, Izuku decided to laugh nervously and shift his eyes to the floor, away from the intensity of his soon-to-be employed. Thanks, but, let's get back to training, shall we? And quad. The hero nodded, leading over to a section of the floor that had been roped off in a square formation reminiscent of a boxing ring, where various mitts, gloves and other equipment laid in various little displays surrounding the square, while two heavy bags lingered a few feet away. Anxiety spiked hard in the less stocky man as he stepped into the ring. He had never been in an actual fight in his life, or rather a confrontation where he fought back, much less one that he won. However, to his deep relief, Rikido climbed in with padded striker's mitts on his hands, meant only for receiving blows and not trading them. I know you're new to the whole fighting thing, but being a hero, even if your job most of the time doesn't involve physical confrontation, means of knowing how to put someone else on the ground before they put you on the ground is paramount to your safety. Like I said, this isn't how you pictured it as a kid, where the heroes always win and the bad guys just go away after you beat the hell out of them. The second you put on a cape, your life is going to be in danger, so you need to know how to protect it if a situation escalates to such a point where you need to defend yourself or someone else. And quad. He slapped the mitts together in a loud clap which made Izuku flinch. The very first thing you need to understand above all else is that combat is 80% mental and 20% physical. Meaning that even if you're the most fit guy on earth and you know every martial art ever, if you don't think you can beat that person who's trying to hurt you, or you are frightened to the point where it overcomes your rational thinking, then you're going to lose, even if the villain is the lamest dude on earth. So the three things we need to focus on with you is number 1, physical strength, number 2, muscle memory, and number 3, confidence. Since you're shaking so much, I'm pretty sure a stiff breeze could knock you over at this point. And quad. He tucked his arms back to where his elbows were extended downward and the mitts faced outwards while being grounded by his limbs. Now put on those boxing gloves behind you and just hit these things dead in the middle as hard as you can, as long as you can. We're not trying to set a record here, we're just trying to get you used to punching. We'll move to kicking soon enough, but for now just get to it. And quad. The prospect seemed simple enough and there wasn't much fear anymore, so Izuku compiled, slipped on the glove and gave a nod of acknowledgement to his teacher before slamming a right jab to the right pad, then following it up with a left jab to the opposing mitt. This continued with little bits of encouragement from Rikido, who smirked proudly at the endeavor. Then without warning, the Sweets hero cranked his right arm back like a cobra and struck Izuku right in the gut, dazing the newcomer as he gasped for air while rolling on the ground for a few breath-stopping seconds. And that is why you need to work on always keeping your movement up along with your guard, because the bad guys don't just stand there and let you wallop on them. Most of the time they'll try to go for your throat or jam a knife in your gut, so you have to keep that in mind whenever you engage with someone physically, otherwise it might be a closed casket service for you. And quad. Izuku glared up at the still smirking man with the ire of one set upon while he was still on the ground. You fucking asshole, you never taught me any of that! And quad. Rikido snickered as he removed one of the mitts and offered a hand to his soon-to-be sidekick. I'm showing how hard this is gonna be, dude. You think a murderer or a rapist is gonna give you that second chance to figure out what you fucked up? What we get paid to do is to put our bodies in front of dangers for the good of the public who can't defend themselves or need some help in doing that. We aren't celebrities, or internet personalities or professional athletes who just play a ball game. We're the first and last line of defense against those who maliciously misuse their supernatural abilities, and it's a mostly thankless, dangerous, and literally back-breaking position which pays just enough to keep you alive unless you manage to reach one of the top 10 in the government survey, which 99% of us don't. There was a distance to his eyes now as his voice grew deeper, the hand falling to his side as he kept staring ahead at nothing. We don't get to play dress up or run around in our tights. That's not what the world needs us for. We're there to save those in need from whatever tries to steal their life from them. It's our duty to stand against the very worst of humanity who have been gifted with powers so horrible that seem to match their inhumanity. If there's some psychopath who wants to bring the world to ruin and kill everyone who disagrees with his plan, then our job is to stand in his path and stop him or die in the process. Silence lingered in the air as Rikito's knuckles became white with a furious anger coloring his face, which was honestly the most horrifying thing Izuku had seen, as veins budged on his face with a look of righteous murder in his eyes. Slowly, very slowly, Izuku crawled away from the hero, not wanting to move too quickly or invite the wrath of a person who could easily snap his neck. Eventually light returned to Rikito's eyes as he blinked at the room around him. He took one look at Izuku's whereabouts and cringed at his own issue. Shit, my bad dude. I was somewhere else for a bit. You wanna keep going? Izuku measured his words carefully, trying his best not to trigger the man out of both fear for his safety and common decency. Yeah, but are you alright? A hand was waved in his direction as the two squared back up. I'm fine, I just slip back to the war every so often. Saw some messed up stuff and it sticks with me. Still, I wouldn't change it for all the gold in the world, since we managed to kick that sick fucker's ass and I managed to bring down some horrid bastards, saving who knows how many innocent people by standing up to them. Izuku nodded, feeling something akin to understanding despite knowing he had nothing compared to what the more experienced man went through. Yet as the hours ticked down, a question bubbled in his head. One he and frankly many others had since the start of the now long ago conflict. Landing one final blow and managing to finally dodge a return strike, Izuku mustered up the courage to speak. Hey Sato, would you mind if I asked you something about the war? The warrior regarded him casually with a shrug as he removed the mitts and curled his fingers. Don't see why not. The quirkless man pursed his lips in what was now a cultural taboo to mention, lest images of horror and suffering be summoned. What was it about? Really? Because nobody has a solid, definitive answer as to why it was started. It wasn't even like a traditional war with two neatly defined sides. Even a guerrilla conflict made more sense, since it was like every criminal was set loose for the sake of mindless chaos. It literally accomplished nothing with no set goal in mind. He flexed a palm to ease some of the pain from the training. Nobody even knew what that hand guy wanted, since all he did was destroy stuff, and the big bad guy got killed right when he was broken out of Tartarus, by the same freak who broke him out, no less. They weren't trying to establish a new government or attack a specific group. It was random, idiotic destruction, and I just can't wrap my head around something like that. The crime fighter again became hard-lined as he gave the desk jockey the once over. Good, that means you aren't like them. Take my word for it, the second you start to understand and sympathize with people like that beyond just simply understanding their psychosis or pathology, that's when you need to worry. Because for most normal people, they can't understand the idea of those who want to see the world burn for no other reason than they can. Demons like that are rare, very rare, and most villains can be helped, but there's a select few who are just psychotic beyond belief. He tensed for a moment. The reason it happened was because a couple villains managed to hijack an underground political movement and subverted it to act as a time bomb so they could gather enough lost, delusional or evil people to throw at the world that they hated with the intent of killing everybody who got in their way, be they man, woman or child. Izuku found himself connecting some of the dots from memory. The League of Villains, right? They merged with the Meta Liberation Army into the Paranormal Liberation Front? Rikito nodded. Exactly, they were funded by All for One originally before merging with the Liberation Army. Those fuckers were without a doubt one of the worst groups of scum in generations. You ever wonder why you don't see any of Destroyo's literature anymore? Izuku raised an eyebrow at the man like he had suddenly gone insane. Because it'll get you put on a watch list at best or killed at worst if the wrong person sees you with it. The Sugar Rush user grunted in agreement. Then I don't need to exactly tell you how people responded to the surviving members of the Liberation Army? Suddenly Izuku felt his chest grow tight and his blood hot as memories flooded back to a more recent time than his childhood, one that nearly made him sure he'd kill a man for. No. The days after the conclusion of the war were brutal. There were no other ways to put it. The times of screaming were what it was referred to as, and it suited it to a T. The whole of the nation turning against a measly 100,000 after losing livelihoods, idols, friends, family, even children to the chaos of a few outcasts was horrible, yet not a one felt guilt towards what they had done to those villains. The jails were emptied and the prisoners hung. Tartarus was soon filled as those who once escaped it returned for protection from the mobs baying for their blood and those who tried to hide in the cities or the countryside. He'd rather not contemplate such a gruesome end to a human being. The two shared the look, one of a fighter brought to his brink and a civilian who had lost almost everything, both due to a few insane individuals who nearly ruined the world. A large, calloused hand was extended out to the quirkless man and he grasped with thumbs crossing in a show of solidarity. Rikido retained some of his usual friendliness in spite of the shared rage and grinned. "See ya, man. Been good training with you. And quad." Izuku released the hold and moved to gather his things, feeling far more powerful than he ever did. "Same to you, boss. I'll be back around next week. And quad." With that, Izuku left the agency for the day, his mind still pressed with the moralistic anger that awful time summoned in all his countrymen. He let the fury go as he pictured the face of his next meeting in 2 days, of her pretty yet tired face, and wondered what her experience during the time of the conflict was like. A yelp of pain filled the air as an eskrima stick slapped hard into the meat of Izuku's thigh, making him lunge forward while his tormentor simply skipped back and to the left, delivering a double stick strike right to his bottom which echoed off the walls from the force in the swing. He shouted in pain and frustration as he reached out to grab the minx which had been tormenting him, lashing out every which way to land a blow while his torso was scattered with deep, purple bruises that hurt right down to the bone. He was actually trying to hurt her at this point, manners be damned, if only to get her to stop hitting him. She wasn't slowing down and every attack was masterfully done, moving faster than he could track. Sometimes she'd dart out of his field of view and hit from behind or rush up from under him. The girl managed to pin him a total of 4 times and she had complete control despite the size and weight difference between them. She'd squirm and move, putting weight on exactly where it needed to be to leave him vulnerable and unable to retaliate until he eventually bucked her off with sheer brute force. They had been at this for 2 hours straight and the girl had barely broken a sweat. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it, really enjoy it. "Come on, Greenie, you can't hit me standing over there and quad." Her voice was like that of a giddy child playing with some lost puppy, complete with the sing-song tone that bordered on a high-pitched baby talk, which absolutely infuriated him to no end and she fucking knew it. He huffed and puffed in an attempt to catch his breath. His endurance was fine, but he wasn't at all used to such explosive movement that had him shifting every which way in order to just try and hit his target. The eskrima sticks in his hands felt like lead, his fingers barely able to keep them upright while he kept her directly in his view, not taking his eyes off her for a second since he knew that would just result in another blindsided attack. Why don't you come closer and find out ? And quad," he said almost as a slur. She grinned mischievously at him, much like a cat who cornered a mouse, which was made more literal due to the fangs poking through the spreading part of her lips. Expertly she twirled one of the sticks in her hand, the weapon making a 360-degree rotation effortlessly as she caught it in mid-air, the sudden motion of which made him flinch. The woman who had invited him into her home twice now gestured to his neck as if to tear it out. "Ah, you getting all tuckered out over there? You just a big dopey man baby, ain't ya? Why don't I just lift up my shirt and let you suckle at my tits for a while ? And quad." Mockingly she put the finger to her chin as if to ponder something before tossing one of the implements into the air and catching it. "Oh right, because you don't get to walk away from a fight without either winning or dying. And quad." Slowly she approached him, a slight sway which bobbed left and right following into her hips as he immediately began to circle in the opposite direction to keep as much distance between them as possible. Still she smiled with all of the mirth of a sadistic teacher with both of the sticks extended at her sides. "All you need to do is just tap me once with one of your rods and then we can call it a day. So far I've hit you 238 times already and you've hit me a big hole and quad." She made an oval shape with her middle finger and thumb while holding on to the blunt weapon. 0 times in 2 hours. And quad. A click of the tongue happened next as the former criminal gave a somewhat kinder smile, one that after such long abuse almost made Izuku drop his guard when she spoke. "However, your footwork is getting better and you're actually learning some striking combos which are better than you first were, so kudos to you there Greenie. And quad." Izuku couldn't help the chuckle that erupted from his mouth at the compliment while the two of them continued to skirt each other like sharks. Thanks, do I get a reward for being such a good boy ? And quad. Himiko put a finger to her chin once more, this time in a more meaningful manner before she turned her head and made direct eye contact with him. "You wanna suck on my tits ? And quad. Blush instantly crawled up the entirety of his face as his mind tried to comprehend what he was just offered, causing him to stumble back into a table. "What ? And quad." She lunged forward the instant his guard was down and made a blow directed right at his eyes which Izuku quickly raised up his laggy arms in an attempt to block, only to pause when the tip of the other stick tapped gently, with no force at all practically, on his windpipe. Looking directly down he could see her golden eyes staring up at him, assured in the indisputable fact that his well-being was utterly in her control, granting her all of the power in the situation. Make sure you don't get distracted by stuff like that, because that's a good way to lose your life. So make sure you're thinking with this head and quad. She tapped him lightly on the skull. And not this head. And quad. With a quick push of her hand, she slipped past the line of his belt and stuck her palm inside his pants, grabbing his balls and squeezing ever so softly while pressing the weapon deeper to his windpipe, making him wince in pain and shock. Because the next gal you run into might just decide to take it with her, capiche? And quad. There was a slight twist below his belt which sent the point well beyond home and had him nodding like he was about to perish, hoping against all hope that this would not become a live demonstration of such a thing. She grinned evilly at him, enjoying every moment of power this gave, and watched the squirming expressions on his face, yet that soon faded when there came a look she knew too well. His fear had overtaken him, meaning he wasn't going to fight for at least another couple of hours until it faded. Disappointed by the end of her fun, she let go, knowing that this was all her fault for pushing a bit too hard. As such, she allowed her hand to travel slowly up and out so he could hopefully enjoy the sensation as recompense for her ruining their game. Yet to the man's credit, he still found the courage to speak, which was admirable for someone like him. Please don't say that was my reward. And quad. Annoyance burned ripe her eyes, causing him to flinch a bit and put a hand over his groin instinctively. She extended a hand over his scalp, brushing aside a few locks of green curly hair while a mild guilt played out in her soul. Briefly she cocked her head to the side, causing him to parrot the action in order to keep track of her eyes like one would a dangerous animal. There came a slight pop from her lips as she regarded him. You still wanna suck on my tits? And quad. He flinched backwards at this, getting his back against the wall while she was less than a foot away from him. What? No. I just wanna sit down and take a break! And quad. She raised an eyebrow at him, doing her best poker face like it was the most normal and serious thing ever said in her life. So you don't wanna feel me up? I'm ugly, is that it? Is that what you're trying to tell me right now? And quad. Had it not been for the 2 painful hours of conditioning he underwent, he most certainly would have moved his line of sight anywhere else in the room, especially seeing as how she scrunched up her eyebrows and put both of her hands on her hips. Rapidly he began to move his hands in front of his face in an attempt to somehow dissuade the allegations. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. It's just that we just met and I'm not really sure if I'm ready to do something like that just yet, and my body is aching all over the place and I kind of just want to sit down. And quad. She stepped even closer to him, to the point where their noses were practically touching, and he froze completely when there came a mechanical click from her right hand, exposing a lockback stiletto-style switchblade that had been taken from her pocket, the blade resting right on his upper right forearm while she gripped the left tightly with the demeanor of an affronted tiger. It's rude to insult a lady's features, don't you think? And quad. Not having any other options, his mind was ordered to say the only thing he could think of. Do you want me to do that? And quad. She looked at him, feigning surprise in an attempt at a comical expression. What? Oh hell no. I only suggested it because I figured that would make you calm down a bit more since you seem to be so jumpy for some reason. And quad. He summoned out a small smile in light of the current situation. That may be due to the knife set against my artery, don't you think? And quad. She looked down at the blade and shrugged, withdrawing the weapon and closing it before back in her pocket. Without a sound made, she walked over to her sofa and cast a lazy glance at him, not really seeing much of a choice since he had a good idea that this woman could bring him back here if he ran. Izuku settled into the opposing love seat and made a vain attempt to lay down completely. Where in the hell do you even find that many blades? And quad. She studied him laid out as he was and found herself feeling a little bit better about her situation in life. The internet mainly. You can buy them unsharpened as collector's items, and I always make sure to use alternative means of currency and have them shipped to a P.O. box. Just a hobby I have to spend some of my earnings on. And quad. Turning over to stare up at the ceiling, he allowed himself a growl of mild satisfaction when his back popped. Alright, now answer me this. Do you always try to tear people's balls off when you only know them for only a week and a half, or am I just special like that? And quad. She smirked at the comment, tossing the closed switchblade at him. Nope. You're a special case that requires a lot of extra treatment, so I feel the need to be a lot more hands-on since your life is going to be on the line. Besides, I know for a fact that's the first time anybody's been down there, so stop complaining. And quad. He scoffed at her, holding the rectangular weapon in his hand to keep his eyes occupied. I didn't ask you to, so why don't you just knock it off? And quad. The smirk only grew. I'm pretty sure that's a crime, to be honest. And quad. Shaking her head, she stood up and pointed to the bathroom. I'll go run you a bath. That should really help take the edge off for a while until you manage to get some sleep, and trust me, those are going to hurt for a couple days. And quad. He scrunched his brows at the blonde in both suspicion and confusion. Why a bath? Don't you have a shower head in your bathroom? And quad. Now Himiko raised an eyebrow at him in earnest without a hint of sass and more matching confusion. You don't take baths? And quad. No, I take showers like a regular adult. And quad. They held each other's gaze for a few seconds before the woman spoke up. "You're kind of weird, you know that and quat. So says the girl who kept trying to twist my nuts off and quat." She waved a condescending index finger his way. "Hey, I was just trying to prove a point there that could very well save your life one day. If anything, you should be grateful for that, since it's a lesson no one else will probably teach you and quat. Are you praising your own weird ass teaching methods, or are you insulting my dating history and quat?" She mused on the question for a bit until she finally found the answer. Yes, I am and quat." An eye roll was thrown her way as he tried to maneuver himself to the bathroom while ignoring the pain. "Whatever, Stabby McGee, I'll just shower in peace and then I'll see if I can keep dealing with you and quat." Himiko cackled at the jab, but said nothing as Izuku slipped into the restroom. A solid 10 minutes later he emerged in the same short-sleeve shirt and gym shorts he wore when he arrived, smelling far better than before. Her eyes followed him as he returned to the love seat, feeling clearly more at ease. Without a word, Himiko stood up from the sofa, marched over to his spot and sat down next to him, wrapping both arms around him and holding him tight. He, naturally, was very perturbed by this. "Hey and quat." She looked up at him but said nothing, making him even more upset. "What the fuck are you doing and quat?" Her right hand moved quickly, pinching the sides of his face in such a way as not to grab the muscles that would cause undue pain when she made him look her in the eye. "Getting some free serotonin and oxytocin. I haven't been able to even hug somebody in 5 years and I know for a fact your dopey head hasn't either, so shut the fuck up and hold me or get the fuck on and quat." Izuku thought to rebuke the statement, but to her credit, she was right, and it did feel rather nice. Begrudgingly he returned the hold, wrapping his arms around her while feeling the cold melt away as they inched a bit closer. Enough so that he could put his head on her shoulder as both caressed each other's backs in a strange mutual need for comfort. He could hear her heartbeat in the silence of the room and she could hear him. Slowly Izuku shut his eyes and rocked backwards, landing on the cushions with her on top. It was nice, so nice in fact that he wanted to fall asleep, and he felt his will to stay conscious begin to fade under the strain of the fatigue combined with the pleasant sensation of being held. Briefly he opened his eyes to check on the girl who, to his surprise, nodding off already with both her feline-like eyes dripping shut and the rub on his back slowing down. Fuck it, he decided. Wasn't like it would inconvenience her at all. Thus he shut his eyes and drifted off to sleep with this strange, barely known girl in his arms, feeling more relaxed than he could recall. Everywhere around him smelt of chalk, body odor and nitroglycerin. Instantly he knew where he was and his heart was in throat. "Oh God, please no and quat." He whimpered as quietly as he could, putting his head on his desk and not daring to look up. Then there came a kick to the side of the small table and a voice he knew would haunt him forever. Well, shitty, Deku's still here. Can you believe that and quat?" Kachan said in his most condescending voice while the sounds of his lackeys laughing at his question echoed in Izuku's ears. "Nope, can't believe it myself. I thought he'd die out by now like all those other quirkless freaks and quat." The long-fingered one said, judging by the voice. "Don't look up or it'll get worse. Don't look up or it'll get worse. Don't look up or it'll get worse. Don't look and quat." A punch slammed hard in the back of his head, not enough to daze him, but enough to hurt badly. "Oi, Deku, don't you hear us fucking talking to you, you fucking shit and quat." Another punch was thrown to his side now, making him wince. "Answer us when we ask, you rude fucker and quat." He breathed deeply, trying to keep it together. "This has already happened. It's just a dream. It's not real. You can wake up and quat." It repeated itself in his head again and again, but he knew how it would end, because it always ended the same way. "Fucking say something already, you cunt. What, you too good to talk to me now and quat." Izuku felt every muscle in his body tense at that. Why did he have to keep reliving this? It wasn't fair. A palm was placed on his back, not as a slap or pat. It was almost gentle with how smooth it glided into place. He could already feel tears start to form. Kachan snickered maliciously, and as he did so the palm of that hand began to warm up. "Maybe this'll get you talking again, Deku and quat." It wasn't fast or outwardly destructive like an explosion. It was silent and relatively slow as the heat began to burn to the cloth of his uniform and onto the skin of his back, essentially acting as a brand burned white hot, which made the pain grow and grow and grow until he couldn't take it anymore and shot straight up out of his chair screaming with tears in his eyes. Izuku felt his eyes pop open with a weight on his chest. Right, the girl was here. He was in her apartment to train. The room was dark and the time told of hours past, likely going into the late night. Instantly the scar on his back began to ache and itch, but dare not disturb it for fear of making it worse. The green of his eyes were suddenly zeroed in on something he failed to first notice in the gloom. Two slightly glowing orbs of yellow stared back at him, passively observing his being while a hand touched his shoulder. The sensation of rhythmic breathing made him calmer, and in the void he heard her soft, angelic tone. "You okay and quat?" It sounded so honest and bare compared to everything else he heard in life that he put a hand to her back and began to stroke, if only to ease himself rather than her. "Yeah, I just had a bad dream and quat." Himiko didn't say anything to that. She instead reached over to a stray lock of his hair and began to fiddle with it while he continued rubbing her back. The two of them silently shared in the relief of knowing for once in their miserable lives, there was someone else in the darkness who wasn't going to hurt them. 913 documents. A full 6 months worth of work, set right in front of him by a man either too busy or too incompetent to get it all done. The thing that made it all the worse though was this was supposed to be his leisure time, the thing he was supposed to do to unwind from his regular 9-to-5 job. Still, he signed up and was officially employed by the Sugarman Agency as the understudy sidekick known as the Limit Breaker, which despite the admittedly kick-ass name that Rikido praised him for, was no different than his regular profession of pencil pushing. He was getting paid a salary for this that was 25% in total of what he would have made yearly at the company. However, there were lodgings within the agency slightly furnished broom closets, that came free of charge. On the flip side however there was no deadline to meet for the rest of the year so it could be done at his leisure. Clicking his pen and checking his stamp, Izuku set to work processing all of the necessary forms and so on for the fiscal year. The current window we had to work with within the week was 2 days, exactly the same length as the weekend. To make matters worse, his employer had a tendency to check on him, which greatly disturbed his flow. Thankfully, by downing a few energy drinks and staying awake through the night, he managed to cut the work order in half, making sure to double check his work of course. He slept at his desk in the tiny office of the agency like countless times before at his day job, except he was woken up not by the blinding flash of lights but the warm sensation of a hand tapping his shoulder and the unmistakable smell of cinnamon rolls. Gazing up with drowsy eyes, Izuku saw Rikido standing over him with a tray of food in one hand. "Hey man, I think you overdid it with work. It's 5 in the afternoon and you've been asleep since 6 in the morning. And quad." Stretching, the shorter man stood from his chair and rubbed the sleep from his eyes before grabbing a cinnamon bun without asking or expecting to be given one. "These files need to be done and I only get 2 days a week to help you out. Meaning it's only 10 days in a usual month that I can be of assistance, and at the current moment we're working at a deficit while there's a constant influx of new paperwork coming in from both the local and federal government. Meaning I only have 10 days out of the month to do this, or if you really want to be pedantic about it, I only have 120 days in a year to get this in order. So excuse me if I feel the need to pull my weight for the sake of this little team we have right now. And quad." The Sweets hero grimaced at the thought, yet there was a reluctance in his soul that shone through his fear of repercussions. "I know and I appreciate it, but you won't be any good to anybody, much less yourself, if you keep pushing your mind to its absolute limit without rest and nutrients. Besides, those energy drinks you have will kill you if you take too many. And quad." Izuku bit on the confectionery, enjoying the warm gooey taste of cinnamon. He chewed on both it and the idea before swallowing them. "Yes, but here's the thing, you won't get paid and I won't get to live out my dream of being a hero if this agency goes under due to unfiled registration forms and mandatory surveys, on top of the massive community reports you keep lagging behind on. So I need to keep on going for both of our sakes, because at the moment this is it. And quad." Retaking his seat, Izuku cracked his fingers and pulled out his pen. "However, if you really do want to help me, then how about you take the other half of this work so I can get done quicker? That way it would be more efficient for both parties involved, leaving us feeling far less drowned in the bureaucracy we find ourselves in. Deal? And quad." A sense of apprehension filled the taller man, which vanished with a groan as he took the other slab of paper over to his personal desk. "I always hated homework. And quad." He grumbled to himself as the more mature part of Izuku's being felt repulsed by the statement of what it stood for. Continuing his duties without turning his eyes away, he shot back in a tone befitting all tamed, effective office drones. "If we didn't have it, then who would turn the gears of the world? And quad." More hours passed with only the solidarity of pen strokes, which made Izuku feel unnervingly comfortable as he continued to slice through the work. His employer, on the other hand, was a different matter altogether. The man clearly did not have the patience or the sort of analytical mind that went so well with cataloging and sorting such material, made even more apparent by how he had the tendency to grumble or chew on the back of his pen whenever something rather confusing showed up. It was roughly 7:30 in the afternoon and they had gotten 85% of the work done between them, bringing the defect they were working on down to nearly 2 months' worth on top of more recent inquiries which could be dealt with later. Izuku would have gladly offered to stay another night to finish the rest of the papers. Unfortunately though, it was a Sunday, meaning he had his actually paying job to get back to come tomorrow. Rikido wasn't too disheartened by this. If anything, he seemed to be relieved at the thought of stopping, judging by the sigh of relief he let out. "Velp, I'm happy with what we got done today. I never thought most of that would get finished." And quad. His massive, muscled arms folded over his back to create a makeshift pillow as the hero leaned back in his seat, clearly beside himself with pride. Izuku glared at the man with his professional senses pricked by such an undisciplined view on the matter. "There's still the matter of the growth rate you have to take into account. Yes, we might have gotten most of it done, but how long will it be until we're back to square one? And quad." Standing up from his desk, the quirkless sidekick picked up a thin 3-ring binder. the contents of which made him scowl as the more analytical side of his personality began to flow freely. Judging by the average receivable date upon each of the documents, discounting the bills, you have an average receivable rate of 5 sheets a day of various legislation that goes into monitoring your performance and providing legal protection in your day-to-day patrols. Thus, you will on average receive a total of 35 documents per week, or rather 1825 articles yearly. Or in other terms, because of your career demands as a street-level hero, there's a 50% chance this will start to pile up again even with my help. Rikido shrugged, pulling a bottle of water from his desk and tossing it to the more numerically gifted person. That's fine, dude. I didn't hire you to be my secretary. This is essentially on-the-job training for you until I say you're adjusted enough to actually head out there into the wider world. I just got behind on stuff for a bit and you're giving me a hand for now. He glanced to the side with what had to be shame, making it a point to avoid looking at his employee. That being said, I know this ain't the best introduction to the job. I haven't even taken you to get your costume yet or any support items. Izuku scoffed at the idea, grabbing his things and readying himself to depart for the night. Don't hold it against yourself. I know just how bad it can be dealing with paperwork, much less when the government is your employer. I'm happy just being able to know I'm something akin to a professional hero. A grumble came from the heavier crime fighter with dissatisfaction clear on his face until he suddenly snapped his fingers in what had to be a eureka moment. Hey, how about I treat you to dinner? There's this bar up near Eastern Tokyo that I've been meaning to bring you to. The food's great and the booze is cheap. A hand was raised at the suggestion with the most moralistic, straight-laced look Izuku could muster at the time. No, thank you. It'll take me about an hour to get back home and then I need to prepare myself for tomorrow, so that is to take up quite a bit of my time. Needless to say as well, I don't believe getting drunk before the start of a work week isn't productive in the slightest. Maybe next weekend. Rikido got up from his desk while practically towering over the neophyte as he slowly closed the meager distance between them. It wasn't intended as a threatening gesture, but Izuku couldn't help flinching a bit when a hand was laid on his shoulder and Rikido brought him closer in a confidential manner as if he was about to share some secret. Look here, little bro, it ain't about filling our belly and having a good time. This place is the premier hangout for heroes in the biz. Everybody goes there at least once in a while. Meaning this is your perfect opportunity to start making connections within the industry, and with me introducing you and your wonderful analytic ability to others who have quite a lot more pull than little old me, then our agency might just get the break we need to get you fully entrenched to the point where this won't be just a moonlighting position anymore. Anxiety and ambition filled Izuku's forest green eyes. That would be quite a step up from where he currently was, and if he managed to attract enough attention from those higher up the food chain, then there came the possibilities of recommendations, team-ups, or even mergers with other agencies, which meant a fatter paycheck or enough to become a full-time sidekick. They shared a hungry, wolfish grin that was understood instantly between them. I'm in. The sweets hero knuckled his moppish head of hair, returning the anxious yet eager expression. Then off we go. The bar was unusually normal. There were no pictures of famous former patrons or anything that denoted it as the place where the best of society gathered. It had a few tacky decorations, a few old arcade cabinets tucked away to the far side wall, along with an ancient box TV that might work until the end of the world harnessed to the ceiling silently playing some game of baseball, and a jukebox near the counter. Or in other words, that was your typical hole in the wall. The place itself was somewhat difficult to find since it only had one barely lit neon sign sticking above the outer door, and the name was unremarkable in the extreme, going by Toshi's Pub, as if the owner couldn't think of something more creative. Yet perhaps that was the appeal. A hidden oasis in sight tucked away from prying eyes or expectations, where the patrons were simply their born names instead of the titles they wore for the public. Izuku mentally shrugged at the idea and sipped his water, looking somehow both out of place and not at the same time in his businessman attire. He was alone at the table since Rikido had found someone to chat with the second they arrived. Two someones in fact that Izuku couldn't help but to recognize despite their shared E&D rank status as pros. The martial arts hero, Tailman, and tentacle hero, Tentacle, both fairly low in the rankings but possessing a squeaky clean record in their decade or more of service to the public. The two were wrapped up in some deep conversation with the sugar hero that occasionally erupted into laughter. So here he was again. A third wheel who got dragged along just like in high school and college. It was roughly past 8 now and he had to be at work by 11, meaning he could burn some more time before he needed to go. Everyone else in the bar, as sparsely populated as it was, were heroes of some shape or stripe that didn't quite match the expectation of maybe one of the top 50 in the nation hanging around. Izuku was still a fanboy, but time and age had given him perspective that made him discard the worship for tonight. After all, these people deserved a rest more than anyone. Briefly he flicked on his mobile and scrolled through the contact list, which was done shamefully fast since it only contained his mother, his boss, Rikido, and the crazy girl. Looking around at the surroundings, he debated the situation and chose to screw it. It wasn't like she had anywhere to go in the morning. You doing okay? I'm stuck at a bar with nothing to do. And quote. The text was short and to the point, enough to make him not overthink it. The message was delivered and read within a couple of seconds, which was soon fired back in just as casual a fashion. I'm good, bored but good. Got a meeting with my PO in a day or two, so we need to reschedule your training to Friday. And quote. A smirk found its way to his face. You gonna try twisting my balls again? And quote. Dots gathered at the corner of the screen for half a minute. Nope. I'm gonna slap you around a bit, beat the shit out of you, insult your very existence, choke you a little cause it turns me on, and then we're gonna cuddle or I'll annoy you until you give up. And quote. He laughed as quietly as he could at that. Is this a training program or light BDSM roleplay? And quote. Another, larger smile came his way when he got a response. Hey, you'll learn something either way. And quote. The humor wasn't lost on him, but to his mild dismay the conversation was cut short when the three pro heroes finally made their way over to his table. Rikido took a seat adjacent to Izuku as the other two filled in the remaining seats. Sorry about leaving you out to dry like that, dude. Me and these knuckleheads got into discussing capture rates and it kinda spiraled from there. Anyway, let me introduce you to Mashirao Ojiro and Mezo Shoji. These boys and I go way back. And quote. The two men were both taller than Izuku with a viable difference in physicality despite their baggy civilian clothes. The one known as Shoji was exactly as his past exposure in the media would have you believe. Big, broad and massive with a blue mask always covering his face while multiple arms sprouted from what appeared to be normal shoulder joints. Ojiro had the look of an average Joe about him, appearing far closer to baseline humanity than his friend minus the tail thicker than his neck sprouting from above his rear, with a head of blonde hair and a relaxed atmosphere seeming to radiate out from him. Izuku cleared his throat and offered a hand to both of the seniors. Pleasure to make your acquaintances, I'm Izuku Midoriya. I hope we'll be getting along well in the future. And quote. The handshake was revived well enough by both heroes, but he was thrown a bit off guard by the snicker coming from Ojiro. Geez Ricky, you weren't kidding when you said this guy could give Ida a run for his money. And quote. An eye roll was had by the more mutated Goliath as he noticed the frazzled reaction of the newbie. Don't mind monkey butt over here, he takes some getting used to when we're off duty. It's a pleasure to meet you Midoriya. And quote. Izuku nodded nervously at the mutant, hoping above all not to make a bad first impression. Likewise, I've heard various things about your service in the Okinawan. And quote. A sensation of something hitting one of his legs made him pause as the limb was gently tapped from below him. Tell us about the notebooks Ricky said you could write. He said you got some kind of natural talent for quirk analysis or something. That true? And quote. Ojiro said in the silence of the moment with what could only be described as a prankster's mirth, earning him a glare from the two other pros. Izuku leaned back and resisted the urge to stomp on the man's tail since he knew how this sort of thing went, adding to the glares the two were sending at the martial arts hero. I wouldn't call it a talent, more of a logical assumption. And quote. The blonde hummed in curiosity. How so? Quirks don't tend to follow the natural laws of things. And quote. Yes, but typically with each person their quirk is the only thing supernatural about them, which can have different ranges of effects on the human body. Some like Sato's where it's almost a basic enhancement upon the existing structure, or yours where it mutates the baseline template of biology. Everything else about the person has to follow suit in a logical order, meaning that somebody can breathe fire, but because of that the human body has to adapt to it and never the other way around. Thus meaning this person has a quirk factor in his lungs that combust the oxygen due to a massive increase in body temperature within the organ that uses dead cells as fuel, necessitating that the throat canal is naturally charred every time and replenished by freshly grown cells under the old ones. And quote. The martial hero raised an eyebrow, completely unconvinced by the explanation as Izuku decided to choose another subject to verbally dissect. Or if you need more proof, your quirk factor is located in your tail, obviously enough, right? Well, due to its placement I gather that instead of it being an independent limb that you can control the same way you could your arms, due to nerve placement you instead need to manipulate the muscles of the lower back and upper legs in tandem to use it effectively. That's impressive enough on its own since you had a lifetime to train with it, but I also bet that it actually has a very detrimental downside if it were to get injured. It's an extension of both your spine and hip, meaning you could have a crippling problem if that was ever pulled hard enough. And quote. The dojo hero smirked at him like he just figured out a puzzle. That's why I got into jujitsu at 5 so I could learn how not to have this dead weight dragging behind me. Bravo to you kid, looks like the Candyman was right for once. And quote. Shoji regarded the exchange stoically as he cast a glance at Rikido who practically glowed with pride. His gaze was met by the sugar titan, knowing exactly where this was leading. See guys, I told you he has the smarts you need to catch that damn thief. Why not have us sign up for that case with you? Be a good experience for him and we'd all get a bigger bonus if we managed to get the creep. Besides, it bumps our rankings up by 10 each, meaning more funding for our agencies. And quote. The more mature of the professionals shifted his eyes to the newcomer. Average height, slim build, clearly having some possibly debilitating neuroses, and screamed Greenhorner. Sighing, Shoji regarded his bulkier classmate with a more judging sense. Fine, but he stays white collar for the entire thing. Otherwise I'm calling this off. And quat. Rikito's expression changed from one set to corner the market to a morally insulted paladin of justice. His bushy brows knitted in mild anger at his old friend. Of course, he doesn't have his costume made yet or an ounce of training. What, you thought I was just going to saddle him up without even getting his support items? Come on, Squid Boy, give me some credit here. And quat. Shoji merely shrugged at the accusation. No sweets, it isn't like that. You've always been one of the most upstanding out of all of us. It's just greed can change a person, if even only for a moment, and out of everyone in the class you're ranking the lowest. And we all know what happens if your rank within the system falls too low. And quat. The burly man scowled at the mutant. Yeah, don't want to end up like those guys from Nagasaki. I got it. And quat. Staring at the interaction going on right in front of him, Izuku found himself utterly out of the loop. However, Ojiro leaned in over the table while they continued to talk, seemingly unaware of the green and blonde-haired pair, and spoke in a whisper. That means you're gonna help us catch a jewel thief. Lucky you. And quat. A heavy shiver came down Izuku's spine for reasons he could only guess at when he processed what he heard. This was going to be his very first case, the thing that would likely make or break his sidekick career, and from the sound of it, he was going to be the brains of the operation. Lucky him indeed. Why the hell would someone steal plastic jewels when there were gems worth millions of yen right next to them? And quat. Izuku found himself asking that question again and again as he punched away at his keyboard. He might be trapped at his day job for now, but his mind was still hard at work trying to unravel the case. It was a strange circumstance that bordered on the ridiculous, with some unknown crook sneaking into jewelry stores undetected, grabbing the plastic replicas of the real thing when they were right next to each other, and then vanishing as if they were never there. All of which have been captured on security cameras multiple times around the city. There was no DNA at the scenes, no signs of forced entry, nothing at all which could determine who or even what this person was, much less what their quirk happened to be. The idea came to mind that perhaps there were multiple players within this who operated as transportation, for lack of a better word. If there was another reason why this person has a tendency to completely vanish from sight even while being recorded, then he wasn't seeing it. Seconds ticked away from the clock as he juggled his mundane obligations to the company which paid him, in the extraordinary pursuit that hopefully would become more than a hobby. Part of him was furious with himself at his lack of dedication to the task at hand, driving the point in twice over when he noticed an incorrect total he haphazardly punched to the document. Yet there was the more wild, childish side of him that wanted nothing more than to keep diving in the complexity of the case, damning the consequences, choosing to keep a modicum of professionalism about himself, if only due to it being the one thing he could take pride in. Izuku cast the thoughts of the case away for now in favor of doing his job. Still, the concepts crept up multiple times until lunch, when he could finally gather his mind, resulting in him muttering out loud to the mild concern of his co-workers. Sitting at the table, he scratched a finger across the wood, wishing he had some way to figure out the dilemma, or at least had someone to confide in. He possessed a few acquaintances from the year he spent at this particular company, and while they weren't bad people, they weren't the type to offer any insight. If anything, they'd actively discourage his hobby for fear of his safety. Groaning, Izuku opened his ramen cup and began to eat when a thought came to mind. Aside from his fellow employees, he knew a total of 5 people in his life at the moment, 3 of which were too busy with hero work to enter a think tank, and his mother was another which he obviously couldn't lean on in this situation, leaving only one other person who might at most let him vent his frustrations about the jewel snatcher, and it left him slightly anxious. The girl was a former criminal herself, so the world of outlaws wouldn't be completely alien to her. However, it was her reaction that would worry him. She had martial skill and a relatively short temper, coupled with a possible aversion to any mention of crime that may turn hostile. That, and the decency of not bringing up uncomfortable topics to a person who literally stopped him from leaping to his death in a drunken fit of self-loathing anger, also weighed on his mind. Yet he paused for a moment to consider. It was Monday, meaning she wouldn't be at her meeting until a day or two, and stopping by couldn't hurt anything. He didn't even need to bring anything work-related up. They could just chat about the footage or something else. Briefly he blushed when the silent hope for more physical contact surfaced from his unconscious. It wasn't anything lewd, but it certainly made him feel better. Sighing, he pulled out his phone and made a mark to the god of fate. What do I have to lose at this point? And quat. Izuku thought to himself as he tapped her contact, opened the text box, and began to move his thumb while more ramen entered his mouth. Hey, I found this weird ass footage on file and figured you'd wanna watch, so you mind if I stop by after my shift? And quat. To his surprise, it took merely 5 minutes to get a response. Sure, ain't like I got much else to entertain myself. And quat. Relief swarmed him to an uncomfortable degree at the realization that he wouldn't be completely alone in this tonight. How long had it been since he invited himself to someone's home? Thinking back on it, he remembered the last time was in elementary school with Kachan. Flashes of sleepovers of over a decade ago skirted around, mixing with memories of birthdays and camping trips. He recalled Annie Mitsuki caring over him, giving extra large portions of her famous beef curry while Kachan talked about all the adventures they were going to have. Mentally watched a rehearsal of bug bites, fireworks and laughter. Then it all went to shit just as fast. His eyes flooded open as every burn mark began to ache with the familiar phantom pain he carried for years. It didn't physically hurt, nothing more than a hot tingle really, but it was the things they summoned which struck hardest. A tremble came to Izuku's hands when he made his way out of the break room. Keep moving forward and go beyond. Deku is dead now and only the limit breaker remains. Don't let him win. He repeated in his head endlessly once he returned to his desk. It was an indescribably difficult task to remove himself from the onset of his bad history. Yet, thankfully work provided a perfect distraction to dive headlong into. Though the trembling didn't cease until his time off the clock came. Later aboard the train, Izuku found a heavy weight upon his shoulders that wouldn't go away. It had been literal years ago. Everyone who belittled him was gone with their own lives to live. They all likely don't even remember him, never giving a thought to the quirkless kid they bullied since was in good fun and quat. They were adults now with the troubles of an adult, so why the hell couldn't he let go of it? All that stuff happened when was a kid, so why couldn't he grow up already and move on? His fingers silently rubbed at a scar burned in his side. He can't go back in time and change anything, so the present was all he had to work with. By that logic he should just accept that it happened and that's it. Izuku lightly slammed his forehead against the window in front of him. He needed to cleanse this bullshit from his system before he got to her apartment. Seeing as having a fit in the view of one of the only people he knew was not a pleasant image, much less when it was over ancient history that doesn't even matter anymore. Hearing the announcement for his stop, the quirkless man stepped off the tram and instantly found the solution right across the street. A 7-Eleven. Yet right as he entered the store, Izuku paused, moved off to a corner and pulled out his phone. Hey, do you have any food allergies? And quat. A few moments passed until he got an answer. No. Why? And quat. Again his thumbs hit across the screen in the same way they had since his youth. I'm at a shop, I'm dealing with something and I want to stress eat. Now chocolate or fruit flavor? And quat. The bubbles jumped ever so softly for a heartbeat or two. I'll take anything that doesn't have peanuts, but something cherry flavored I guess. You want to have me cook dinner to make it even? And quat. Izuku relaxed a bit the farther away his soul got from the stingers of the past. He certainly wasn't smiling, but he wasn't shaking or aching. Don't bother, I'll get takeout. Burgers sound better than pizza? And quat. More dots jumped until another text came back. Pizza definitely, meat lovers, and sorry to ask, but since you're at the store can you grab a case of Buzz since I'm running low? I'll pay you back. And quat. With a basket in hand he started assembling what was in actuality a coping mechanism that he could eat. He threw one last message before committing himself to the task completely. I already have cash, so don't worry, I'll be over in a bit. And quat. Half an hour came and went, which resulted in 3 bags loaded upon his person along with the pizza and the drinks. Yes, he splurged an irresponsible amount of money on junk food. Sure, it cut into his monthly food budget by 1%, and yeah, maybe he had a problem, but it made him not feel shitty, so it was worth it. The satchel continuing his personal laptop banged against his back as he ushered himself to the 3rd floor and found the apartment number, reaching out a fist to tap the wood. Strangely, the door didn't immediately open. Instead there came the sound of more locks being done, and then the crazy girl's voice came through. Who is it? And quat. Shaking his head, Izuku tried not to let his annoyance show in his response. It's me, the guy you like to beat up on the weekends? I would've called but my hands got filled. And quat. Nothing happened for a number of seconds, then the sound of locks being undone echoed and the door swung back, revealing the blonde in a crusty looking t-shirt and pajama pants. Her bag-riddled eyes had a curious quality about them as she noticed the multiple bags of sweets and snacks hanging around his arms, along with a pizza in his hands and the energy drink case set to the floor. However, Izuku returned the confusion when he saw a single-edged tanto knife no longer than his palm in her left hand. Himiko shot him a look that typified her expression. You needed that much candy? What are you, a 3rd grader? And quat. Izuku didn't know what he should have been more concerned about, the fact that she had a weapon or the fact that he was barely surprised by it. I said I wanted to stress eat and I meant it. Besides, who the hell can get angry when they're given food? And quat. The knife slided effortlessly between her fingers as Himiko grabbed the energy drinks with her free hand and ushered him in. You'd be surprised. Now get in before somebody mugs you. And quat. Placing the goods to the dining table, Izuku was instantly hit with the reek of copper in the air, making him turn towards the kitchenette where a pot was boiling something red. Squinting his eyes, he turned his head to his host while setting the Hall of Sweets up. Not to be weird or anything, but, are you good on blood for now? Because I can make another trip out before I get settled. And quat. Her eyes also squinted at him with a mix of confusion and disgust before blinking upon coming to some realization, judging by the way she quickly ceased having such a rigid posture. Nah, I'm good with that stuff for another 5 months and then some. I appreciate the sentiment, but I never let others buy that for me even as a favor. And quote. Standing up from the table after setting up their diabetic feast, Izuku clicked his tongue as his old analytic habit came back into play. So, I'm gonna take a shot here and say your quirk probably isn't the prettiest. I know you want to keep it to yourself, which is fine, but I want to ask if I can do anything to help you manage it. Assuming you're having any difficulties, of course. And quote. The cat-like yellow of her eyes narrowed. Not to the point of suggesting danger, but enough to outward show how insulted she felt. Not saying a word, Himiko walked right up to him and delivered a punch right to his solar plexus. I manage well enough on my own. Now how about we change the subject before I feel the need to throw you out of here? And quote. Curling over by only the slightest due to the unexpectancy of the blow, Izuku nodded, hoping he hadn't touched too big of a nerve. Fair enough. Do you have any ideas on what that should be? And quote. She continued to glare at him as she poured the sanguine into a cup and sat down at her sofa after grabbing a slice of pizza. Yeah, why the hell did you decide to hit me up on a weekday? It ain't that I have anything going on, but you stick to that routine of yours religiously. Meaning you want something from me. And quote. Izuku flinched at her assumption, with even more shame piling on top when he chose to take a seat at the table, away from the section of the living room that she could reach. Well, yes, but if you don't want to hear it then I'm down to kill some time. And quote. Her lips were stained a dark red from the cup, making the woman appear more dangerous than she should be. Sighing, she took a bite and fired back once it was finished. Alright, let's hear it, and if you're asking to bang then I'm kicking your ass. And quote. Indignation colored him as he took a slice from the box and fixed her with a righteous glare. Is everything about sex with you? No, I didn't come for a lay. I have this project from the Sugarman Agency that I wanted to bounce some ideas off you for. Again, if you aren't feeling that then I can just hang out. And quote. Himiko pursed her lips at his response and shook her head, setting the blood-filled cup down with a slight modicum of guilt. Sorry, I'm used to a whole different type of person. Anyway, what's Mr. Diabetes got you doing? And quote. Taking a nibble of his slice, Izuku moved towards the coffee table and set his satchel down, removing the computer and pulling up the files forwarded to him last night. At this moment we're in a joint case with the Tailman and Tentacole agencies respectively to track down a vanishing jewel thief who doesn't steal jewels, and I've been tasked with figuring out how he does it. And quote. Rolling his shoulders, he gave her a sympathetic look. But if that sounds like something you don't want to help me deal with then we can do something else. And quote. Himiko shrugged at the suggestion and moved over to where he was sitting, watching the playing footage of the suspect with a half-caring eye. So a bunch of E-listers teamed up and set you with the hard stuff. Sounds about right. I'm in, all my work's done for the week, so this seems like a good enough distraction. Now, what motives have you got for the guy? Money? And quote. Izuku returned the shrug, trying not to be perturbed by how close she was. You'd think so, but he only steals the plastic prop jewels so far. No cash is grabbed, none of the actual jewels are taken. It's always the same thing where he magically appears in a random store with no rhyme or reason at around midnight with no attempts of entry. He just appears in a bright flash in the middle of the room and starts pilfering until 10 minutes later, where he leaves the same way. And quote. Himiko hummed at this, clicking back to a certain point in the video. Every show is based on redirecting the eye while your hands do the work. And quote. He raised an eyebrow at the former felon. Come again? And quote. She waved a palm at him, intently watching that particular segment of the footage. An old saying one of my friends used to say. He was a magician before going south, and he had a mo of stealing stuff for fame since he was a compulsive kleptomaniac. One of the things he'd always do is keep the audience's attention on a particular object so he could use his still hand to complete the trick, making it seem like magic. And quote. He kept the brow where it was. Your point being? And quote. She refreshed the video one more time, careful to not drink directly over the device as the warm blood entered her mouth. My point being is that maybe your man is acting for a different reason than just grabbing those jewels. Think of it this way. If those items worth thousands by themselves were taken, then it likely be bumped up to a B-class case, and if he wanted to go completely undetected then the cameras would have been scrambled. So it's likely this guy may want to be seen, just not by the powerhouses. And quote. This only served to confuse him more. Alright, may I ask why? And quote. The cup was drained of liquid, which was dangled in front of the green-haired man who begrudgingly got the message. Ever hear about the boy who cried wolf? People get desensitized to things if they happen with enough frequency. Meaning that it lowers people's guards if it's proven to be a minor threat, which opens them up for a killing blow, or a major score in this case. And quote. Wrinkling his nose at the smell of the liquid, Izuku moved back to the couch once it was refilled with blood, starting to maybe understand. So you think it's a setup for something big? And quote. Taking the cup and nodding in. Thanks. Himiko shrugged at the suggestion. Maybe, but I've experienced that Occam's razor is usually the more likely answer to most things. Judging by how this guy carries himself, he's likely a noob at this and wants to make trial runs before going for anything that might put a target on his back, or in other words he might be trying to build up the courage by desensitizing himself to the act. And quote. She paused, exiting the window and scrolling down the list of stores hit. A hand rested on her chin in what could only be described as a thinker's pose. Or maybe, he's using misdirection to make you think he's only going to steal the fakes. Look here. For the past 2 months he keeps grabbing replicas of more and more pricey gems and assuming he gets enough decoys while the capes think nothing of it when he does appear. He might be able to pull an Indiana Jones without anybody knowing. And quote. So you think he's going to swap out the real gems for the fakes? And quote. She turned her head over to him and gave a sly grin. Well, looks like you do have taste. Anyway, pay attention to the stores he keeps hitting. They're lower end strip mall joints with shit security, and only in the last week has he done a bigger job. Every time he's done so there's always a more expensive replica missing. It always increases by a factor of 1,000 in the price, and he consistently stalks the Nagasaki prefecture. Given the logical path he seems to take, eventually he'll go for the biggest goal he can. Likely that'll be the only actual real one he takes. And quote. Izuku bit his teeth, deciding to go grab a candy bar from the pile to ease his nerves. That's nice and all, but how does that help with catching him? She raised from the sofa in turn, pulling out a now chilled energy drink from the fridge and pointed a finger at him. Simple, you appeal to his sense of greed. Make it seem like there's something worth risking his safety, a once-in-a-lifetime score that could fulfill his ego and his wallet. Do that and you'll more than likely have your culprit. And quote. Izuku pondered the idea, and the more he did, the more it made sense. Like gathering a bunch of replicas of high-end jewels, leaking a false claim that they're real and being transported to, say, the Imperial Museum or something while stopping at Nagasaki for a night due to complications. And quote. She tapped on the head like a proud friend, grinning far more kindly than usual. That's one way, though there's probably a million others we aren't seeing. And quote. He felt pressure filter out of him like a steam. At least it was an idea. Walking back to the sofa he smiled as he finally shut his laptop after making a note of the plan. Then suddenly he felt bashful upon understanding he didn't have a reason to be here anymore. Still he leaned back in the shitty furniture, not reacting much when she followed suit and wrapped an arm around him. They shared a haze of two worn-out people glad to simply be at the moment, and soon he did likewise as she did, holding her for the human need of physical contact. You feel like watching a movie? And quote. Himiko dug a little more into his side and let out a hum. Sure, I got those pirate movie boxes. But I'm gonna say this right now for your sake, I think it's best if you went home right after, since things get crazy on the streets by midnight. And quote. Izuku said nothing to that, merely relaxed as she flipped on the application. This was his time to unwind and decompress from everything that bothered him. The case had one idea that he could give to Rikido. His day job was over for now and nothing else in the world needed his attention, leaving him to simply breathe and enjoy the heartbeat of someone just as forgotten as him. When the film started, some cheesy Kiju B-movie that she swore up and down was good, Izuku smiled at the place around him. This was nice, he deserved this. For an instant the man who had once given up on his dreams saw a possible future, one where he was a professional hero or maybe still a sidekick, living his best life with the help of the same woman who pushed him to do so. Maybe they could bring each other up as he climbed the ranking, get a better life for them both as mutual partners in crime. Regardless, whatever was to come their way, he was sure the future would be bright, because it had to be. That's all for now. If you enjoyed, let me know in the comments below, and leave your suggestions as well. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Merry Christmas, and Happy Holidays.